So this picture was taken in 1977 in New York City. At that time, the city was almost bankrupt and the crime rate very high. The village became the home of many artists attracted by cheap housing, and some of them were using the streets as their canvas. This is when statements such as this one, both sarcastic and poetic, started popping up in many places in downtown New York, always signed under the same pseudonym, Samo. Samo as a conglomerate of Norman genius. Samo for the so-called avant-garde. Samo does not cause cancer in laboratory animals. Art critic Jeffrey Deitch remembers that back in the late 70s, you could not go anywhere interesting in Lower Manhattan without noticing that someone named Samo had been there first. 2 years later, though, it ended dramatically with these final words: Samo is dead. Samo was not a person, but a collaboration between two graffiti artists and high school friends that ended in a fallout. One of them, Al Diaz, already had a track record at that time, and he's still part of the New York art scene today. But if you've never heard of him, you're not alone. Apart from this collaboration, he never produced anything that gained large recognition. As for the other guy, only 2 years after the death of Samo, he produced a painting that recently sold at an auction for a groundbreaking $110 million. The other guy was Jean-Michel Basquiat. Although his career was short, as he passed away from a drug overdose at 27, he's now widely considered to be the most famous contemporary artist. So how is it possible that two high school friends, both described as very creative, who started their career together at the same place and time, and initially making indistinguishable art, could then reach drastically different levels of success? Well, I'm not an artist nor an historian. Until a few years ago, my relationship to art was limited to going to galleries and museums on weekends. But I'm a data scientist analyzing billions of data points every day to understand human behavior. And one of the questions I've been focusing on with some of my colleagues over the past few years is how success emerges in society. As social scientists, we think of success as a collective phenomenon. It corresponds to how much society rewards an individual or a product. It can be how often people Google your name as an athlete, your number of citations as a scientist, how often people listen to your songs as a musician, your book sales as a writer, or your number of exhibits as an artist. The currency of success can vary across domains, but what the research shows is that some of the laws that govern success are universal. So where does success come from? Well, intuitively, our success should be the result of our performance as individuals or of the intrinsic qualities of the products that we create. And there are some domains in which this is true. For instance, I'm sure most of you have heard of Usain Bolt, right? The reason you've heard of him is that Bolt is the fastest runner on Earth, and thanks to his performance, he became a superstar with just under 5 million followers on Twitter, extending his fame well beyond the circles of sports fans. More generally, the data shows that the performance of a professional runner is enough to predict with very high accuracy her number of Twitter followers. And the reason we can predict popularity so well here is that a runner's performance can be measured with extreme precision. This is also true in tennis. Some of my colleagues showed that knowing the number of points a player gains in tournaments is enough to accurately predict the number of views of her Wikipedia page over time. So whenever an individual's performance can be measured accurately, it determines society's response to that performance. Yet, in many domains, we lack these objective measures of quality of performance. And the arts provide us with some striking examples. According to the great philosopher Leibniz, there should be some definable, measurable essence of beauty that makes one piece of art objectively better than another. Well, if this was the case, however, the game Artist or Toddler would not be so much fun. You know, it's this game where you have to guess whether a picture is a famous piece of contemporary art or was made by a 4-year-old. Well, let me show you some examples, and I'll give you a few seconds on each picture to make a guess. So this one was made by a toddler. This one by an artist. This one by a toddler. This one by a toddler as well. And this one by an artist. Okay, well, don't worry if you get some of them wrong. I got most of them wrong, and in fact, ABC made an artistorian play this game on TV in 2005, and they didn't do too well ever. And the same thing is actually also true in music. In 2007, the acclaimed violinist Joshua Bell performed for 45 minutes in a subway station in Washington, D.C., without disclosing his identity. During this time, 1,000 people passed by, and only 7 stopped to listen to him, giving him overall $32.17. So time and over, we're faced with examples of how difficult it is to measure artistic quality in an objective fashion. And because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, predicting who will become successful becomes trickier. Think of Harry Potter, which sold 500 million copies in 79 languages. With such a mind-boggling success, it seems obvious that it was going to be a bestseller. However, J.K. Rowling's first book was rejected by 12 editors before being picked up by the small Bloomsbury, which decided to publish it. And even the success of the Mona Lisa, certainly the world's most famous painting, is often justified by art historians by her enigmatic smile or the sfumato technique used by Da Vinci. But the truth is that until the early 20th century, Mona Lisa was only one among many appreciated pieces in the Louvre. And it's only when it gets stolen in broad daylight in 1911, triggering an international drama, that it came into the spotlight it has never left since. So if we cannot rely upon objective measure of artistic quality, does this mean that success in the art is unpredictable? Well, in 2006, a team of researchers at Columbia University designed a very clever experiment called the Music Lab to understand how songs become popular. They created several identical versions of the same website, displaying the same list of 48 songs by unknown bands. Each participant in the experiment would visit one of the sites at random. She was then asked to listen to the songs and had the chance to download the one she liked. The only difference between each version of the site is that you could only observe the number of downloads of each song by the participants who visited that version of the site before you. What they found is that a song that ended up being the most popular in one version of the site could be among the least popular song in another version of the site. And that popularity was the result of the influence of the other participants who visited the site before you. So this experiment actually shows a typical herding behavior that is familiar to psychologists. When we do not have enough information to make decisions on our own on the quality of a product, we tend to rely on the perceived wisdom of the crowd. And as we've seen, it's extremely hard to judge the quality of an artwork. As a result, we tend to rely on a network of experts, curators, art historians, gallery owners, etc., to evaluate art on our behalf. So does this mean that observing this network of influence can help us predict artistic success? Well, answering this question is easier said than done. The art world is highly secretive, so collecting data on art is a daunting task. Ever wonder, for instance, why you never see a price tag in a gallery? Well, in New York, for instance, galleries have been constrained by law to display their prices since 1971. But in practice, they often only disclose the price of an artwork to selected buyers. But the opacity of the art world makes it extremely difficult to quantify at scale the dynamics that govern artistic success. Now, with the rise of digital technologies and the capability to collect and analyze very large data sets, this secrecy is falling apart. My team and I were able to collect historical data on the career of about 500,000 artists since the 1980s and across 140 countries, where they exhibited, and the price of their art. This allowed us to conduct the largest scientific study on art ever realized that was published in the journal Science in November 2018. In art, you cannot predict success by looking at quality or performance, but that doesn't mean that it lacks order. Our data allowed us to unveil the invisible network of influence that governs how an artist navigates the art world. Seems complicated? It's actually quite simple. Each time an artist is exhibited by, say, Gallery A, then Museum B, you can think of it as a link between these two institutions. Why? Well, because galleries at these institutions typically look at one another to validate their decisions. If an institution sees that an artist is exhibited by another institution whose judgment it trusts, it's far more likely to exhibit that artist. So by collecting these millions of links, we could reconstruct the map that governs how art moves around the world. In this map, the round dots called nodes are art institutions, colored by the country in which they're located. So red, for instance, represents the United States. The links between these nodes encode the intensity of the exchange of artworks between institutions. So two institutions that frequently exchange art are more tightly linked and will appear closer to one another on the map. The size of a node represents the prestige of that institution. Just like Google's PageRank algorithm can evaluate the importance of a web page by looking at the hyperlinks that point to it, we could measure the prestige of an art institution by looking at the prestige of the institutions it receives art from. If an institution exhibits artists coming from many prestigious institutions, it means that it's itself prestigious. What our map brings to light is how extremely polarized the art world is. The center of the network, called the core, is very small, contains only about 400 institutions, which is about 1.7 of the institutions worldwide. The major hubs of the network are part of this core. They are the world's most prestigious institutions, like the MoMA in New York, the Tate in London, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, or the Baylor Foundation in Basel. Institutions in this core are tightly linked to one another, exchanging artists mainly among themselves, no matter what the geographic distance is. The remaining 23,000 institutions are part of small isolated groups called islands. Institutions in these islands are also tightly linked to one another, exchanging artists mainly among themselves, but very rarely with the center of the network. And because the art world is so polarized, artistic success is extremely uneven and unforgiving. If you started a career at an institution in the center of the network, you're almost guaranteed to keep exhibiting at prestigious institutions for your entire career. You will be exhibited internationally, and the price of your art will almost always increase. Only 0.2% of the artists who started the career at the core of the network ended their career being exhibited at low prestige institutions. On the other hand, if, like the vast majority of artists, you started your career in one of these small islands, your success prospects are extremely grim. After 10 years, your chance of still being active as an artist are 3 times less than those who started in the center. And for those who persevere, their progress is painfully incremental. Most of them will remain trapped on their island. It will be extremely difficult for them to reach the center of the network, and their most expensive art will be worth 5 times less than those who started in the center. So the data completely tears down the myth of the unknown artist who emerges late. And because the network governs your path to success, we could build an algorithm that predicts with very high accuracy the evolution of an artist's career. Only knowing the first 5 exhibits of an artist was enough to predict the evolution of her career. The power of the network is what Basquiat had understood intuitively very early on. Whereas Diaz was a loner, Basquiat was an aggressive networker. Soon after the end of his collaboration with Diaz, he became friends with many influential artists from the downtown scene, including Andy Warhol and Keith Haring. These friendships soon led him to Bruno Bischofberger, who became his art dealer for Europe, and more importantly, Larry Gagosian, the world's most powerful gallerist, who invited 22-year-old Basquiat to come paint from his home in Los Angeles. So Basquiat's initial steps into the network sealed his path to the level of prominence that he reached today. Understanding what leads to success is important, because it can help each of us define better strategies for ourselves to feel rewarded by what we do. Our findings, in fact, carry over to other domains which lack an objective measure of quality or performance. To succeed in these domains, we need to master the network. But it's equally important to understand when the way society is organized is meritocratic and when it's flawed. Big data can help us bring inequalities to light, but it's only the first step. We then need to design policies to reduce these inequalities. And because so much is determined by an artist's first steps into the network, one solution to level the playing field could be to constrain top art institutions to implement lottery systems to exhibit a quota of emerging underrepresented artists, or have blind selection procedures, similar to the one successfully implemented in classical music. Art is about all of us, how we reward human creativity and allow all the beauty that is trapped on these islands to emerge. Thank you.